a leader in research in our community. They've literally helped hundreds of organizations and brands connect, engage, and market to the entire spectrum of the LGBT community. Many of the reports are also available for free download on our website, IGLTA.org/research. They are huge supporters of IGLTA and our foundation, and we really appreciate that. We've done a lot of projects together. They also do fundraising for our foundation. So we really appreciate both of you and the team in San Francisco. So without any further ado, I'll hand it off to Tom Roth and David Paisley, both calling in from California.
Great. Thank you very much, John. Yes, we've appreciated our partnership as well. I was thinking back about the cancellation of this year's convention with sadness, because I think it would have been my 26th, maybe 27th. It's just such a highlight of my year. Now we're going virtual, at least for a little while, but at least it's so beautiful and makes me so happy to see all of our friends participating in this webinar. So it's the next best thing. We really appreciate it. So yes, today's topic is a study that we completed last month about LGBTQ travel in the world of COVID-19, some of the impact and ripple effect of COVID-19. I'm going to turn it over to Dave in a couple minutes, but for the few who may not know us yet, I'm going to introduce our company. Dave? Can you advance the slide? No.
I think he's on mute.
Uh-oh. There we are. Now back up. Can you do presentation mode?
Hey guys, this is Annette. Can I just teach you something? We're on Zoom, right?
No.
Oh, you're not on Zoom. Oh, okay. Because there is a way that you can remotely share access to the same presentation, and you can have both of you controlling it.
This is not Zoom, it's Google Hangout, and it's different.
I wonder if you can do it on
Okay, I think I'm back now. I lost internet connection for a second and flipped out. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Let me put it back on thing and we'll get back into. All right, sorry about that. Hopefully it doesn't happen again.
All right, so let me just briefly introduce my team. That's me on the left. Started community marketing back in 1992. David joined me soon after. He's our senior research director, and Lou is also on our research team. She's working remotely right now from China, where her family is. She was with us for about 6 years in San Francisco, and now is working with us in a different time zone, but still very much involved in our team. We started, as I said, in 1992. We're an NPLCC certified LGBT-owned business. We do all forms of market research, but specifically focused on the LGBTQ community. We also have a panel, which in lay terms is a database of LGBTQ consumers who are interactive with the LGBTQ community, meaning they read our media, they attend our events, they belong to different organizations, and so forth. And we do a wide variety of work. Next, please. About a third of our clients are in finance. About a third of our clients are in tourism and hospitality. Thank you very much to our clients in the call. We love you. About a third of our clients are kind of all over the place. We work with media. We've done a study for WNBA, UPS, retail, and communications organizations. We do a lot of work with nonprofits, government organizations, universities. So some of you may know us, but may not know all the different things that we do. We also work with other researchers when they're kind of stuck on what to do with the LGBTQ market. So I'm going to turn it right over to Dave, because our time is limited and we want to have time for plenty of questions, to tell you a little bit about the study and then some of the findings that we gathered from doing the study.
All right, thank you, Tom. And I just want to check, is my sound quality to you all pretty good?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm a little choppy. I think I'm having some internet issues up here, but as long as you can hear me, I'm good. And I will go from here. All right, so really quickly about this study. First of all, it was about 1,864 people who were USA LGBTQ community members. It was relatively balanced by gender and household income and race and ethnicity and also age. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that when I put all LGBT figures up there, we do weight it. And how we weight it is that we even out that little difference between the men and the women. And then we have gender expansive at 8%. And then we tend to weight out the three major generations equally, even though this particular survey came a little bit higher with millennials, 38%, but we weight them down a little bit and weight up the boomers just a little bit to even out the response. So just keep that in mind with all LGBTQ figures I'm saying here. And I also want to point out these 4 important points is that this is a super fluid situation. And this survey was fielded May 14th through 19th. So that's about a month ago. So how people were feeling then, maybe is more like how people are feeling today when we had a little bit more optimism around June 1st, but it's been, a roller coaster on this. But you do need to understand that this was fielded during that roughly 6-day period, and that matters. At least here in the United States, and shouldn't be, but it is, as everything else is. COVID-19 is very political, and it's sort of divided the country more into like a liberal response and a conservative response. And you should understand that the LGBT community does trend more liberal, and our response may be being affected by that to some degree. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but we are talking here on these figures mostly about people with a history of travel. So one thing, like a lot of COVID-19 studies will just ask the general population a question about travel, but we need to understand there's a certain percentage of the population that just doesn't travel, and they're giving their opinion on these surveys. So we actually wanted to take them out. So although LGBTQ tends to travel, about 15% did not travel in 2019. So we actually limited them from the responses to the results that I'm showing you. And I think that's important because if they didn't travel in 2019, we can't really expect them to travel in 2020. We really want to know what's going on with what I'm going to call LGBTQ travelers. And in this study did not try to compare with the general population. We're an all LGBT research firm, but there was some good work with Bob Widick and some other organizations that did do some comparisons between LGBT and non-LGBT. So you can take a look at that, and LGBT fared really well in those studies. All right, so first of all, we asked this question, think back to 2019, what types of trips did you take? And this isn't that important here, but it does give you an idea a little bit about where that 84% did travel. And so I'm just throwing that out there that this particular research, the results I'm showing you is really about the 84% who were LGBTQ vacation travelers in 2019. As you can see, big city, urban was more likely, and we would expect that. But I'm going to talk about this more because I'm going to show you about where things went up and down on these destinations types a little bit later. All right, and also section 2, I just want to talk about financial issues a little bit. We just asked in this survey in mid-May, has the pandemic had a financial impact on you? Only just under 50% said yes, and I think that's interesting. That seems to me it has had some financial impact on everyone, but at least in mid-May, about half the group didn't really said no, or they weren't sure yet. But I think what's important here more sometimes is the major, minor, negative financial effects, about 49%, that it was relatively equal across gender and generation. But those people who earn less are actually getting hit hardest by this pandemic. And those people who are earning the more are getting hit least. And there's been other research to show that in the general population. And I also want to say that our 2020 LGBTQ community survey, this is our annual non-travel survey, was just published this week. So that is on our website, ready for download. And we asked this question, and this is like a standard tracking question that many research firms use, but would you say that your family situation is better or worse off in the past year and the future year? And what we see here generally is that within LGBTQ, there's been a downgrade in economic confidence for about 6% on people looking in the past year and 13% people looking into the future. So I don't think that's that bad, but we all need to acknowledge that with all communities, probably around the world, that the vast majority of us are having an economic impact on this, and the LGBT community is no different. If we look on the right side for the decrease in the better off response, what we're going to see is a higher impact with the particularly the African American and Latinx communities in the United States. And again, that's not a surprise here when you look at just some of the other kinds of news stories that are coming out in the United States. All right, a little bit more about travel in 2020. All right, first of all, is desire to travel again. And this is sort of very closely matches some of the information that IGLTA has already put out. But we've asked how pent up is your travel for vacation? And 34% said it was extreme and 35% moderate. So that's 69% of all participants had extreme or moderate desire to travel again. Only 12% said they had no desire to travel. But I think what's interesting here again is on that bottom side is if we look at the demographics between men and women, it was relatively the same. This is for extreme desire to travel again. So those that are most likely. It's a little bit less in the transgender, non-binary community, but we often see that within travel studies. There's a less of desire to travel there. But I think what's more important here is that you see with generation is that willingness or that extreme desire to travel is much higher with younger people than older people. And we're going to see this throughout the research is that older people are more cautious here. And people with a higher income have more interest in travel. So keep that in mind also. So trip cancellations among LGBTQ travelers. Again, this was mid-May, and we asked because of COVID-19, did you cancel any kind of vacation plans already for 2020? 72% said yes. That's both a great number and a bad number. It's of course a bad number because we've lost so much business, but it's a great number that showed how many trips were booked by the LGBT community as we're really great travelers. So it's both an impressive and an unfortunate number. The cancellations were really strong again in May through July, and then we didn't see it starts to break down. And some of my sort of qualitative work I've been doing with some of the other research that we're doing. People who had plans like in September, October, November, were mostly just keeping them, trying to see what was happening. But a lot of these short-term trips, particularly in May, June, they had to cancel. Like there's no choice almost because a lot of the destinations they were going to were shut down. So again, these cancellations are not to be unexpected. But some good news. We asked, considering COVID-19, your personal finances and other concerns, what's your best guess at the number of overnight trips you're going to take for the remainder of 2020 by plane, train, or car? And then we also said don't include business trips. So what we see here is that 68% of the travelers said that they're going to take at least one overnight vacation during the remainder of 2020. And 42% plan 2 or more. So I think those are pretty encouraging numbers. But importantly, only 29% of those intending to travel for a vacation had actually booked a trip. So again, back a month ago in May, you had this situation where LGBTQ travelers had pent up demand. They wanted to travel, but they hadn't planned anything yet. They canceled their trips. They hadn't planned anything yet. So the vacation dollar within the LGBT community was really just thrown up into the air. And nobody really knows, and I don't think anyone today really knows really quite where that will land. I know for me and my partner, we canceled a couple of trips, and I've scheduled a couple of trips, one to Flagstaff and one to Pismo Beach, both car vacation trips, but we are starting to book vacations again, but COVID-19's influencing those trips. All right, so the bad news is that we, of course, are going to expect less overall travel in the LGBTQ community. That's no surprise to anyone. But when we look at some of those original lists of where people traveled to, and where they think they're going to travel to in the future, we can get a little ideas of sort of somewhat winners and losers here. So I want to show this and explain it. In the gray, it's destinations travel to all of 2019. So that was the chart I showed you earlier about the different destination types, but that was for a full 12 months. So what I wanted to do is just do apples to apples as far as the other questions that we asked for this particular survey and cut that percentage fairly or not from to 67% or 8 months of the 12 months. So this was like their 8-month figure for last year. And then we compared it to where their expectations for 2020 were going to come for the coming year. And as you see, the biggest drop comes with big city metro vacations. That was sort of like a huge drop. Small town vacations starting off on a lesser point, but almost equal to big cities now. Beach destinations had a drop, but not as bad. Outdoor vacations didn't have much of a drop at all, but you're starting from a relatively small number. International vacations cut in half, but still 11%. We're still interested in international vacations, which isn't too bad, and cruise cut in half. So what I'm really showing here is that there could be some real winners and losers to this, and this will be evident with some of the charts I use further, is that the more crowded the place, the more apprehension. And then that's just sort of the way it plays out right now. Also, we asked for the remainder of 2020, where are these vacation places likely to be? And as you can see, that a lot of people are more interested in driving vacations this year. It doesn't seem like there's a big difference between people taking longer flights or shorter flights within the USA, but it does drop off the interest for international trips. But even things like 8% Europe or 7% Mexico, I don't think those are really very bad numbers. I think the interest is still there in Europe and Mexico, and there's still opportunity if people feel safe. I want to talk about car vacations. I know a lot of people here are internationally, and this is USA, you're not going to have car vacations, but the research really did show that there was a strong interest in car vacations this summer. 43% said they would take a car vacation in June, July, or August. That's how we define the summer. What I really want to say to destinations out there is that typically all destinations have their opinion of what their drive market is. And what I would say for this summer, it's probably a little bit longer. So I work with a lot of destinations that consider their drive market sometimes 4 hours, or some of them are even up to 6 hours. But a good percentage of the population are willing to drive more than 6 hours this summer. So when you're doing your marketing, keep that in mind, is that there might be unique opportunity, and maybe just this summer, where people are willing to drive farther, gas prices are cheaper, some are avoiding air. So keep that in mind, is that you may be able to go out to that next ring on your car vacation marketing plan. All right, activities when traveling. So for this question, it says, for the rest of 2020, how safe and comfortable do you feel about participating in these type of activities while traveling on vacation? And what I really want to point out here is that a lot of these activities can be urban too. I mean, sometimes, as I said before, we would expect a decrease in big city travel, but a lot of big cities offer vacation experiences that are not crowded. So the top ones people are feeling very comfortable with was hiking on an outdoor trail, but also visiting urban parks or gardens, right? So that was number 2. So the blue is very comfortable, the red is somewhat comfortable, and the gray is not comfortable. So again, the concept of hiking on trails and visiting urban parks where people feel really comfortable. Again, it's about crowds and space. Same thing, walking urban streets and neighborhoods. People felt relatively comfortable doing that. So there's lots of great historic and other types of neighborhoods in many big cities that can really be promoted. But what gets worse and people don't feel comfortable is on the bottom of the list, attending indoor concerts, maybe visiting a casino, visiting a moderately crowded bar or nightclub, taking public transit. For most people, don't feel comfortable with that. So I think this is about marketing message, and for many destinations, you may have to, at least for this summer, really reposition your destination and what you have to offer. Those things that you typically may have been promoting to the LGBTQ community just might not fly this summer, right? But other things that your city may have to offer may be very attractive. And I'll talk about this a little bit in the context of couples and singles a little bit later in the discussion. I did put a thing about hotels. I have some stuff, by the way, I know there's some airlines here. I do have some information in the full report on airlines. I wasn't expecting airlines on this call. I thought it was more destinations. But if you scroll down the full report, there's some air research there too. But this one about hotels, regardless of your travel plans, how safe and comfortable do you feel about staying in a hotel? And, relatively few, about a quarter, said that they do not feel safe or comfortable. But relatively few, 10%, said they felt very safe or comfortable. Most people are like somewhere in between. But on the right-hand side, we talk a little bit about what the hotel itself can do to make you feel safe. So first of all, hotels increasing disinfecting. Okay, that's great. Hotel front staff area has social distancing requirements between guests and staff, was very important. They wanted hotel staff to be wearing face covers, but I think at 70% is really interesting. Hotel has a posted physical distancing policy for staff and guests as you enter. And I think this really has to do a little bit about this whole liberal versus conservative dynamic of the United States about this epidemic. People really want to feel that the hotel is taking this seriously. And part of that seriousness is that they have a posted physical distancing policy and they're enforcing it also. So I think that's part of it, and that's the big the big fight right now in the United States is face masks, and as ridiculous as that might seem, that's just where we are. All right, a little bit now. I'm going to talk about our community survey, and then we'll open up for Q&A. And first of all, we asked this question, and this was actually a series of questions about LGBT community outreach, but I just pulled this out, is that Pride events are important to our community. 82% agree. I think there's a real loss. I feel it. I mean, so many of the big Pride events across the United States and across the world have been canceled this summer. I think the community is feeling a little bit of loss. And, as much as many of these Pride organizations are trying virtual events, and I'm really glad they're doing it, there is a real loss to the community. So hopefully we can get through this, and Pride 2021 will be bigger than ever, as we'll have pent up demand. I want to talk about type of community. One thing that we always stress, that sometimes LGBT people sometimes get pigeonholed as being urban gays, that we're all living in big cities. And, clearly our research does not show this. Now, the LGBT community survey is a little bit different than our panel, because the LGBT community really outreaches to about, the LGBT community survey really outreaches to about 150 LGBTQ media that feed people into it. So these numbers are actually a little bit higher than our panel numbers are. But the thing I want to stress is that most LGBTQ people do not live in big cities. And what that means, I think, for many, many destinations is that you often are looking to other big cities to feed into your market, right? And what I'm going to say for that is that is great, but there are all these LGBTQ people that live out there within driving distance in sort of suburbs and rural areas and small towns, or maybe small cities that are close to you and you're the urban center. And I really want to stress that might be a really great market for you this year. And it's often an overlooked market. I think when we do a lot of our research just in general for big cities, they're always shocked to learn at how important the LGBTQ drive market is to their big city. It's almost universal when we do these research. They're shocked at how big that kind of market is. It might be even bigger this year, and maybe more important than advertising to your traditional fly markets. So don't ignore that. A lot of LGBT people do not live in big cities. We're living in the suburbs and rural areas and small towns. As I say in calling in from Joshua Tree, California, population 7,500. I also want to talk about relationship status. At any given moment, lesbian and bisexual women are more likely to be in a relationship than gay or bisexual men. And although we didn't test this on the COVID survey, there has been some other Gen Pop research showing that in a world of social distancing, it can make travel for single people difficult. It's really easy for me to travel with my husband and go to many different locations and just social distance and hang out with him for a long weekend or a week and have a really great time. And we're doing that because I'm getting really a little stir crazy here in Joshua Tree, California. And it's easier right now for couples to travel than single people. And a lot of the things that attract single people may not be available right now. And that will have an interesting dynamic in visitation between gay and bisexual men and lesbian and bisexual women, because men are more likely to be single, right? So it could be interesting, like maybe a lot of these younger single gay men just want to hang out in your city with a couple of friends, but maybe that dynamic or the positioning needs to let them know what they can do, because they might not feel comfortable going to bars or nightclubs or some of those things that single people often do. You might need to position your destination as a place where a small group, like 2 or 3 gay male friends, can come to your city and do all this sort of fun stuff and get away. Right. So, but I want to point that out, and some other research sort of backs that up, is that it's easier right now for couples to travel than single people. And then finally, I want to talk about the terminology within the LGBTQ community, and I'll turn it back over to Tom. This is something we've been doing in the LGBTQ community survey for a long time, and people ask about. So it's new data, and I'll put it out there. And that's just in the USA market. How should you refer to this community as a whole? And as we all know, it was LGBT for a long time. And then it moved to LGBTQ, which is the most popular. And this thing called LGBTQ plus is now coming higher. And those sort of dynamics are still happening. I think the big change that's happened in the last 5 years is the big drop off of negatives. When we used to do a chart like this, there used to be quite a few negative responses to all these terms. And as you can see today, there's, people I think have just sort of given up to some degree, is that they realize that many companies and corporations are using LGBTQ or LGBT or LGBTQ plus, and they're like, they're all okay, right? But what I would tell people today is that I think you should probably stop using LGBT in outreaching to the USA. That is dropping a little bit. It's still okay, but I think it makes you look a little bit behind the times. A lot of our clients use LGBTQ. That's perfectly fine. If you're using LGBTQ plus, that's perfectly fine. Although the positives are a little bit less than the other terms, but there's really no negatives here. And we also started testing the I. We want to acknowledge that in South America and Europe, often the I is included in LGBTQ. And that's not so typical here with marketing to the United States, but it's not really picking up yet in the United States, including the I. But we always tell our US clients that if you're outreaching to other parts of the world, you should check what the language preference or the alphabet preference is in those countries to really respond. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom. We can open up for Q&A.
Yes, so just to finish up here, we've referred to our website as a resource, and thank you, John, you did too. On our website, which is simple, cmi.info, not cmi.com, by the way, .info, we have a lot of research reports ready for download, and we really encourage you to dig in a little bit. It's so easy to make assumptions about the LGBTQ market based maybe on our own experience or talking with friends. And some of the data may really surprise you. For example, I was just chatting with Sean that a lot of people are surprised that we're not all urban dwellers, and that there are lots of marketing opportunities, as Dave was mentioning, in smaller communities and beyond. So, as Dave mentioned, the LGBTQ community survey is literally hot off the internet press. We just completed the report this week, and if you'd like a copy of that, please just let me know. We also have our annual tourism and hospitality survey that's from December, and then kind of an update to that we presented just a few highlights today, but there's a lot more information in there about the COVID-19 and LGBTQ travel. And even if you're not in consumer products or health or auto, there are quite a few reports on there. I think for me anyway, it's really interesting to just download them and understand the perspectives of LGBTQ community regardless of the topic, because there's lots of really good information there. And all of our reports, we break out men, gay and bisexual men, lesbian and bisexual women, and gender expansive, meaning non-binary, trans man, trans woman, etc. It's really just important to see the distinctions even within what we call LGBTQ or LGBTQ+. So take a look there. If you want a copy of this presentation or a copy of the report that we just referred to, feel free to just shoot me a quick email and ask, and I will reply back with the links so that you can get those pretty easily. But we are running a little slim on time. I wanted to be sure that we leave some Q&A time, so you can move to the next slide, Dave. That's our Q&A slide. There we are. All right. Any discussion out there? I don't know this to be a quiet group.
Yeah, typically. Well, this is John, and I just want to say that thank you for this data and research. You guys are always leading the charge on this, and we know that data is power for our members, whether they're destinations or tour operators or hoteliers, etc. I definitely fall into that category of 34% having extreme desire to travel again. I haven't traveled since December, which is really odd, because I'm typically overseas twice a month. So I'm in that category. But yes, anybody have questions, just unmute yourself, or you can type it into the chat. Don't be shy.
Babs always has a question.
Okay, go Babs.
All right, so
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everyone. So my question for both Tom and Dave, where do you think price fits into all of this as well right now? Because it used to be a driver. People used to look for price or what they could afford. Do you see that people will expect to pay more now for travel than they did before? Or can you give me some insight into that, please?
I think it's actually a little bit all over the place. I think we first of all need to acknowledge that this epidemic has affected people financially differently. And I think people who are poorer in the United States are actually doing worse off because of the epidemic. And many people who are quite wealthy may have these great, great tech jobs where they're working at home, and this has had no effect on them whatsoever. But I think it does have some interesting things. Like it's interesting that if you're going to choose a car vacation instead of a plane vacation, well, guess what? As a couple, you may have just freed up $1,000 there because you're driving, and you might be now willing to upgrade your hotel, or might be able to upgrade your eating establishments that you go to. So I think I can't really answer that question to say that I think it's all over the place. I think some people have more money. Some people are going to be changing their spending priorities when they travel, but there are a lot of people that have less money right now. So, and also people have canceled trips. So they may have that financial budget just sitting there and waiting for the right opportunity. And I think what's really hard right now in the United States is that a lot of places, you just don't know if it's open or not, if it's going to stay open. I mean, some of these things around quarantines with what happened with New York or what's happening with Europe right now. I mean, how do you book a trip a month or so from now in that environment? It's really hard.
Thank you.
Russell from Tel Aviv, and I think a few others as well, have the same sentiment. He wrote in there that he was surprised to see that most of our community are not urban dwellers. A big surprise for him. Do you want to expand on that a little? It does seem like that is surprising to me as well.
Yeah, we did a more balanced. Again, the LGBTQ community survey is the LGBT community survey, which the slide I put up is sort of a co-op of about 150 LGBTQ media. And that's a little bit different from our panel. So I think if we looked at that, it said that people who live in big cities is about 40%, but our panel it's about 33%. But there's also this concept of smaller cities. So those are urban areas. And people do live in those too, but roughly about 33% live in about very urban areas. 33% will live in about what I would call more like suburban, suburban/small cities, and 33% will live in smaller communities. And that might surprise you, but I'm going to say that it's a very gay male perspective. And what I mean by that is when you look at the research is that gay men are far more likely to live in urban big cities than the rest of the community. And it surprised me when we saw it too. But if you look at the women's market and even the transgender market, it's not an urban-based market. And also understand that you may live in, say, Atlanta, but a lot of LGBT people don't live in downtown core of Atlanta. They may live like a 45-minute drive from the downtown core, and they consider themselves, even if they're in the city of Atlanta, living in suburbia, right? So those suburban markets and like those suburban communities that have popped up an hour and a half, 2 hours outside of our cities that keep growing and growing and growing, more and more LGBT people are living there.
Good point.
Dave, I have a question. Do you think that has anything to do with raising kids and wanting to be in an area outside of a city, maybe where there's better schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at our LGBT community members with kids, that's very dominated by the women's market, that could be a really good, real reason is that happens in the general population too, is that when you have kids, sometimes you move out to the suburbs for better schools and more space. So I think that's part of it, but I don't think it's just that. I think that LGBT people can live anywhere now. Again, this is sort of like, but like, what would you consider places like Palm Springs? Palm Springs is really not urban, but in Palm Springs, half the city almost is gay now, right? You look at a place where I live, like Joshua Tree, California. I was 5 years ago, the first gay man to live in my neighborhood, and now there's about 10 gay people living in my neighborhood. There's a migration happening right now, and maybe with COVID-19, not just with LGBT, but with a lot of people, that migration might speed up.
Can I find out from Clovis how he feels about the information he saw on this, or what actually some questions he might have regarding the Brazilian market? Because they're also suffering as we are here in the United States.
Yeah.
Clovis, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Bom dia.
Bom dia. The situation in our market that is really complicated because we are not in the top of the mountain of the virus, but we have, a very difficult situation now. For tourists, everything's, stopped. We don't have flights. Hotels are closed, and I think we need to wait until September, to be honest, to have a better idea of how we did the tours.
And what was also going to follow up with what Clovis just said, because I think it's super important, is that it's hard for people to plan travel today in the long term. People, I think, even if I wanted to trip to Brazil, it's hard to know. Even if I wanted to fly to France, it's hard to know because we're hearing stories in the United States that we may be banned or have to go into quarantine in Europe, right? You can't today plan really far out because you don't know how this epidemic is going. So it creates a more of impulsive situation for your marketing budget and people's travel. So I think people need to respond to that. It's a really different situation. You need to readjust what your typical marketing messages are, and you may realize that a lot of travel is going to be impulsive in the short term or short-term plans. Like by short-term plan, I mean like less than 30 days.
Exactly. I also asked you guys, how can you have those incredible number of people? Because for us, it was not difficult to find everybody around. And you guys found trans people and lesbian people, it's incredible. How is this process? How do you, found those people?
Unfortunately, that broke up for me a little bit, so I didn't hear the question, if there was a question.
Oh, how's CMI, looking for the market, different market, different cities, it's a big number of people, it's incredible. Lesbian, trans people, how is this approach? How do you already have the data?
I'll answer that. Yeah, so the way we grew our panel and the diversity of the panel is by partnering with about 300 LGBTQ media, organizations, bloggers, influencers, social media, organizations like NGLCC and IGLTA, events like Pride and film festivals. Every year we do our LGBTQ community survey. We partner with them. We give them a dedicated link. They send out the link to all of their readers, members, etc., attendees. Those people fill out the survey, so that helps really diversify our panel. That's why we have such great representation in the gender non-conforming community and the ethnic communities and so forth, because the fingers really are reaching out deeply into the diversity of the community. And the benefit for them is that they get a free report. We send them the data that we collect from their readers and their organization members. And for us, it's the diversity of the panel. So yeah, it's really quite an asset.
And one thing I would also say is that, and I think this is just generally true, is that if you're advertising in the LGBTQ media, not all, but a lot of that media is very gay male dominated. I mean, the reader polls are like 85, 90% men. So even for us, I think the way we diversified our panel is certainly cooperating and being part with the LGBT media, but we also work with a lot of the organizations out there. And sometimes it's easier to reach women in the transgender community through their organizations than through the LGBTQ media that can be very male dominated.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Also, can you guys address anything about how travel is going, or has anyone made any comments about how travel is going in this Trumpian universe now? Because we don't have a real feeling of trust or confidence in anything. How are we going to have trust and confidence in the travel market? Do you have any insights?
Yeah, we actually have a whole section in the communities. We actually have a whole. we actually have a whole section in the community survey on the political situation, which you can download now. But there's a lot of anxiety within the LGBTQ community about this upcoming election. Obviously, there's probably a lot of anxiety in every community out there, but there's just a ton of anxiety out there about what's happening politically here. And we also asked a question that sometimes we can't view. Sometimes we view the LGBT community as being a one-issue group, like LGBTQ equality. But what also the research clearly shows is that there are about 5 issues that are really important to us right now, which includes the epidemic, it includes racial discrimination, but it also includes healthcare and one other I can't remember in front of me. But you know, we're just not a one political issue group. That there's a lot of things going on in America right now, and it's all influencing us, and it's giving this community a lot of anxiety. But I'm not so sure that's not true of every person that I talk to. There's just a lot of anxiety in the United States right now, and the world.
I see that Richard Krieger has put a question in the chat. It says, was population the main criteria used to determine what constitutes a small versus big city, or were there other considerations?
Yeah, we actually let people define that themselves. And I think that's sort of interesting, especially when you look at some of these Sunbelt cities, is that some of these Sunbelt cities in the United States are huge by geography. And some people in these cities will live in urban cores, and some people will live in very suburban settings, even though it all may be Atlanta, right? So we define the community as like urban big city, medium-sized city, small city, suburban area, rural area, and small town surrounded by countryside. Those are our categories. And we let people self-define it. It's not based on zip code or anything like that. And actually, that's something that our work with the Census Bureau is really interesting, is that, you know, we've worked with the Census Bureau as a contractor, and how people define their community is getting very strange right now, because the concept of urban boundaries used to be a little bit clearer in the United States than they are today. And it's sometimes today really about a perception of your community more than some some definition that maybe the Census Bureau traditionally used.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? I see Richard Armstrong put something in the chat. Did you measure political views outside of the U.S.?
Yes, we did. We defined political views not as parties, but we defined it as liberal, moderate to liberal, moderate, conservative to moderate, conservative, and conservative. So those were our 5 categories. So that would have allowed us to look at political views no matter where the country was. So in the United States, by the way, the LGBT community is quite liberal. You know, we have very few people who would consider themselves conservative or moderate conservatives. However, I would say we have really a reasonable number that define themselves as moderate or moderate liberals. So, you know, one thing that you'll see within the document is that although we certainly are trending liberal, there are a lot of people that use that word moderate too, 41%. So sometimes the community can be a little bit less, a little bit less very liberal than you might think. And that is particularly true of older men that tend to define themselves more moderately.
And that chart and breakdown are in the community survey that we just released this week. So there's a lot of information. We only touched on a few slides from that, since this is a travel conversation. But there's a really broad sweep of the community in terms of media consumption and political issues and the priorities for the LGBTQ community over the next 10 years. There's a lot of really great information in that to absorb.
And we can get that from sending an email to you, Tom?
Yeah, that's the fastest way, just tom@cmi.info. And I'll reply back with the link, so you can just have it for a download. It's a PDF.
Thank you.
Tom, I emailed you just a few minutes ago. If you want to send that to me as well, because what I'll do is when I send out my follow-up email tomorrow to this group, I'll include all of that in the email as well.
Sure, Kristen.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Russell, how does all of this information help you now in Israel? Is there some few things you can take away with you?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's very interesting to hear the conversation that's going on, mostly based in the States, but as most of my clients are from the States, it's interesting for me to hear what they're listening to and what they're hearing and what their situation is. It's also very important for each one of us in the travel business, especially people like me and incoming and like you, Babs, and outgoing, Clovis also, or all of us that are doing, that are travel agents, travel designers, travel advisors, all of the above, to stress over and over how important it is for people to book through us because we're on the ground. We know what's happening. When the hotel is opening, we know what's happening with them, what their cleaning standards are, what everything that's going on, we know because we're here. Regarding opening and closings of countries, we're also keeping our finger on the pulse of what's happening. For example, Greece and Cyprus and Bulgaria and Georgia, not Atlanta, Georgia, the country Georgia, was supposed to open up to us on July 1st because of the unfortunate rise of the virus here in Israel over the past few days. That was pushed up till August 1st now. We're all playing the same game. We're guessing, trying to give educated guesses, but we all have to. We're all in the same boat here.
Thank you.
Sure. It's all very interesting. Avi and I were supposed to go to Athens on July 1st. That was canceled. We're supposed to go to Tiromolinos on August 8th. Who knows?
Yeah.
And I was supposed to be traveling on July 4th to Copenhagen. Oh, Hagen. I'm supposed to say Copenhagen. And to Estonia and the Baltics. And
Nice.
all of that, of course, changed as well
Out the
as
window.
everything else. Yes.
I'm sure we can all write a list of places over this during 2020 where we were supposed to go and didn't quite make it.
Especially Milan.
Especially Milan. Absolutely.
Purtroppo.
But also what I would say about that is pivoting is that there is opportunity. I mean, I think there's opportunity lost, but there's opportunity gained sometimes. And like, I know a couple of the people that I talk to, they are, starting to do marketing campaigns, but they're really looking at that 4-hour drive market. If I look here in the Palm Springs, Joshua Tree area, as a vacation destination, Joshua Tree is sort of booming right now. And that's because of all these LA people who are driving here because they just need to get out of LA and they're booking Airbnbs. And we're pretty full. The same thing is true of Big Bear right now, which is sort of a mountain resort over Palm Springs. Some places are opening up, in my opinion, almost way too fast. I was in Big Bear for a hike last weekend, and it was downright crowded and scary how crowded it was. It was like almost shocking. So it's interesting that you might need to look at those, especially if you're a country, like how do you increase tourism to those places that at least feel safe? They may not be any safer. It might not be any safer to go to Big Bear than it is to go to San Francisco right now. It was actually probably more crowded in downtown Big Bear than I would be on any street in San Francisco right now. But there's this perception of what safety is, and how do you feed into that?
In Brazil, I think it's almost the same because the internal tourism in Brazil is pretty big. We are talking about 2 million people, and we are working in small towns around São Paulo. 1 hour, 1 hour. And people are moving around, go to the beach. The problem is that the beaches are not open. You can go to the beach but not go to swim. Yeah, you have to look where to go. What is open and what is working.
But also, are people practicing the social distancing? Because it seems like it's going to be this catch-22, and it's just going to keep on perpetuating. And that's the problem for all of us is, do we try to make a quick buck now, or do we stand back and really wait and see? Because it really doesn't feel safe out there.
Exactly.
How did you feel, Dave, when you were actually walking in Big Bear?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, we do have a mandatory mask, and people were reasonably good about having masks on, but there were just some people that certainly were almost aggressively not. It almost seemed like they were aggressively trying to
Throw it
not
in your
social
face.
distance. Yeah, it's interesting. So the majority of people were fine, but some weren't. But it just made me feel, if I went back to Big Bear today, that I would continue hiking and go up into the mountains, but I probably wouldn't go downtown, you know? So it's still a great destination, but downtown was a little bit strange. But if I can go to any city in the world and find neighborhoods that are not that crowded, right? And a lot of those places are really charming. And it may be, if I went to any big city around the world, I may go into neighborhoods that I never considered before and have a great experience, a new experience, you know, that I've been to that city 4 or 5 times. So anyway, it could be a little bit about positioning. And who knows when this virus goes away. So we need to also be thinking about, you know, we all want to believe that this virus will be a vaccine or a cure, and this will all be over in a year. It might not be, right? So we all have to start thinking about, what is this? How are we going to position our countries or our cities or our destinations over the next 2 years if this virus never goes away?
So on that up note, I think the bottom line here is resilience. I think the bottom line here is absorb as much information, keep up to date, read the news, read the research, connect with these meetings every week, and just stay resilient, because every day, every week, it's different. Hawaii just dropped their quarantine, and the New York area just added a quarantine. So who knows? It's just changing all the time, and we have to be really on the ball and resilient. So I want to thank IGLTA for the opportunity to share some of this research with you. Again, we produce these reports at no charge to anybody who wants to read them, clients or not, because this is our opportunity to help raise the boat for everybody. And our partnership with IGLTA just continues to get stronger, and we'll always be there to help them. So I'm going to turn it back over to, I guess, John to say some concluding remarks.
Yes. Just a quick thank you, Tom, Dave. Yes, Babs, you can clap. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to our members. Your information is always insightful. It's very helpful, and we just always appreciate your partnership and your kindness. So thank you guys very much, and thank you everyone for joining us today.